Hello, this is a recording of a presentation that was given during late fall, early spring 2024 to Academic Cabinet and a number of the academic departments. And I'm sharing this recording with our stakeholder offices and programs that we hope to work with over the course of implementing Canvas outcomes. So this presentation is intended to give a heads up of where we're looking to go in order to create meaningful instructor-driven processes for assessing student learning. We have created a feedback form so that if you have feedback you'd like to provide to the Office of Academic Assessment, you're able to do so after this presentation. And I will send the link to that feedback form along with the email that includes this recording. So here you see a chart that shows the scope and labor required in the various programs that we've used to assess student learning at Emerson from 2013 to 2023. For us, we see assessment as an ongoing process aimed at understanding and improving student learning, following on the definition provided by Tom Angelo. It involves making our expectations explicit and public, setting appropriate criteria and high standards for learning, gathering, analyzing, and interpreting evidence, and using the resulting information. And so I asked for time during the spring to talk with each department about our continued work to create a meaningful and sustainable process for assessing the student learning outcomes established by each department for their various majors and programs. Our definition of assessment centers students and instructors first and foremost, while also meeting our institutional obligations to show evidence of academic excellence. We believe it's important to collect information about students' achievement of their department's learning outcomes in order to inform program decisions and enhance learning. So my primary goal for this presentation was to share information ahead of a formal proposal that we plan to send to faculty assembly once we're able to share it with the new provost. And this image sums up where we're headed. We want to move towards a process, that being Canvas outcomes, that will provide high quality, broad information about student learning with minimal impact on faculty and instructor labor. So to date, the processes I'll talk about in more detail have required substantial labor and therefore have been limited in their scope. I also think it's important to clarify the difference between academic assessment of student learning and grading. Our projects evaluate students' achievement of department learning outcomes in order to inform programs' decision-making. Ideally, course-level outcomes derive from and align with the relevant departmental learning outcomes, which in turn reflect the college's Big Five outcomes for its students. Course-level outcomes are developed by faculty, evaluated through course assignments, and measured by students' grades. Departmental level outcomes are developed and periodically reviewed by the departments, and students' achievement of these outcomes develops across their years of study as they synthesize learning across courses. Their achievement of those outcomes is what's evaluated through LEAPS projects assessing student learning. Based on this understanding of academic assessment and how we collaborate with faculty and instructors to understand student learning at various points in their education, we drafted this mission statement based on our working definition of assessment and with feedback from the LEAP Fellows last year, in order to highlight our commitment to collaborating with faculty and instructors and centering student learning in our assessment practices. Our goal is to support departments' conversations about their curriculum and provide meaningful information departments can use to enhance student learning. During the NECHI visit in 2022, the team commended Emerson for the progress it had made on student learning assessment over the last 10 years. They also noted that the building blocks are in place for a strong assessment plan, and that it will require a systematic and sustainable approach that must be one faculty believe is efficient and effective, and we agree. Throughout our conversations, the team also noted that assessment must expand beyond a primary focus on undergraduate majors on the Boston campus to address learning at all levels, locations, and modalities. To achieve this, we have to build a more sustainable and less labor-intensive process. So while accreditation is not my office's primary motivation for seeking to understand student learning, the NECHI report pointed to key goals and commitments that we have to work towards as we implement a clear and useful process. So our office is responsible for establishing, as I've said, that sustainable process for assessing students' achievement of the learning outcomes each department sets. In doing so, we're committed that that process be instructor-driven and minimize additional labor. Our goal is to create a process that all faculty and instructors can participate in and find meaningful. We believe that good assessment practices enhance students' understanding of the value of their courses and their ability to speak to what they've learned. And therefore, we're committed to building equity-minded practices that use student input to verify that this is true. Finally, we also want to enhance the transparency and integration of equity-minded assessment practices. What we mean by this is that we are collecting data that enables us to meaningfully disaggregate information about student achievement across a broad range of identity categories in order to check for and close opportunity gaps for student success. This means that we value building a process with a clear, shared purpose and direct application to helping departments make decisions about student learning. We also know we're not there yet and that we're making progress. In 2022, we surveyed faculty about their experiences with assessment at Emerson. Only about 11% of faculty strongly believe the purpose of academic assessment is clear, with about 13% strongly agreeing it's useful and contributes to equitable opportunities for students. While more faculty somewhat agree, we want to improve our practices so that a majority of faculty believe in the clarity, value, and usefulness of Emerson's assessment processes. So this slide gives you a high-level overview of the past decade of assessment at Emerson. The college drafted its Big Five outcomes in 2013-2014 as part of the Student Learning Outcomes Subcommittee of the Emerson ACE Internationalization Laboratory. The college's outcomes were adopted by the faculty in September 2015, and at this time, responsibility for assessment moved from CITL to the SLC. After this, each department went through a process to create and adopt departmental learning outcomes, and the Student Learning Committee began to conduct assessments of student learning. In most cases, these involved faculty volunteers to the committee who assessed an aspect of student learning within their own singular course. We shifted from the SLC to the Learning, Equity, and Assessment program in the spring of 2021 and shifted to LEAP projects that collect and evaluate student work across multiple courses. I'm going to go into more detail about that process in a moment. It's a process used at many institutions and it's also labor intensive. And so we're currently conducting Canvas outcomes pilots and creating departmental curriculum maps in order to move towards Canvas outcomes as a more sustainable means of collecting student outcomes data. The first major change we made from 2013 to 2021 was to implement the Learning, Equity, and Assessment program. In this process, I met each semester with department chairs to establish the departmental learning outcome that would be assessed and which courses we'd reach out to for faculty participants. My office and the department's LEAP fellow reached out to faculty. Those who volunteered as faculty participants provided access to all student submissions for 1 to 2 assignments in their course. My office then worked with the LEAP fellow to draft a rubric for assessing the departmental outcome and recruited reviewers to complete the assessment. Once the work had been submitted and anonymized, the following semester the faculty reviewers met to discuss the rubric, norm it, and then individually score a set of student work. We would then meet to discuss their findings, and based on this process, the LEAP fellow completed a report with suggestions that was submitted to the department for discussion and follow-up. We completed 2 semesters under this new process in 2021-2022 and then asked for feedback from participants. I spoke with LEAP fellows about the labor-intensive nature of the process. Essentially, they were rereading and scoring student work that had already been submitted and graded by an instructor. While this is aligned with practices at other institutions, we also heard that this was not an ideal process for Emerson's programs, many of which are experiential and involve in-person work that can't be easily captured and provided to a committee for review. From an equity-minded perspective, faculty also wanted to be able to account for individual student growth and an alignment between assignment instructions and the departmental outcomes being assessed. From our perspective, the scope of this assessment is necessarily limited. Because it's so labor-intensive, we averaged an evaluation of 38 student works per department each semester, drawn from 2 to 4 course sections, and reviewers would read and score an average of 13 to 15 student works each. So in response to this feedback, we researched alternative practices for assessing student learning that would better address Emerson's specific needs. Based on this research, we began piloting Canvas outcomes in spring 2023 to determine whether this could provide a better and more meaningful process. In this process, after meeting with the department chair, we recruited 3 to 5 pilot participants. These faculty agreed to submit ratings of their own students' achievement of the departmental outcomes using a similar 0 to 4 rubric scale at the end of the semester after grades were submitted. Once their evaluations were received, OAA processed and visualized the data. We then recruited 2 to 3 project partners who in the past would have had to read and score those 13 to 15 student works. Instead, now they were able to meet and analyze the quantitative data we collected. Over the course of 2 one-hour meetings, they reviewed findings and made suggestions that were included in the LEAP Fellows report to the department. So this changed 2 key pieces of the process. Faculty and instructors were scoring their own students' achievement of the learning outcomes, and project partners were no longer asked to read and score work. Instead, they focused on analyzing the data collected. We completed 2 initial pilots in spring 2023 and expanded that to 8 pilot projects in fall 2023, and the reports for those were just received this spring. So there was 1 in each department and the Marlborough Institute. We were able to collect during fall 2023 information from 16 faculty teaching 23 course sections. All told, this represented student learning evaluations of 477 students, which was a 157% increase in comparison to our average for the number of student work collected in previous LEAP projects. And we're on track with our spring 2024 pilot to have data on about 500 students. This also means we have enough data to meaningfully disaggregate it across categories such as major, international student status, first-gen status, race, and other identity categories to identify areas of achievement and concern. We also find it compelling that a department that in spring 2023 was unable to complete a LEAP project due to faculty commitments was able to complete the same project using Canvas outcomes in fall 23, with 4 faculty participants evaluating 8 course sections comprised of almost 200 students. For the purposes of the pilot, I want to take a moment to show a brief example of what the process looks like. This is a line from the rubric created to evaluate a departmental learning outcome associated with marketing communication courses. Here you see the outcome language for effective communication, and beside that you see the language representing the 4 levels of outcomes achievement: adept, proficient, developing, and novice. For each of these, we've strived to use language that is not deficit-based because we expect students to move from the novice or developing level as first years through to proficient or adept at the time of graduation. Again, they're addressing this outcome over the process of several classes taken at various points in their major. So throughout this process, we're collaborating with faculty to create language that is appropriate for their programs and outcomes. For the purposes of the pilots, we created a separate assignment that lived at the end of participants' courses. This pilot had the rubric attached, and faculty were asked to use the speed grader feature to evaluate their students' holistic achievement of learning outcomes using the rubric language provided. These evaluations were not tied to students' grades, and students did not have to submit or resubmit any work for review, and faculty did not need to reevaluate student work. Individual faculty's ratings were not shared with the data reviewers. The data was compiled and analyzed for student learning as a whole. One piece of this project that we're particularly excited about is the ability, given the scope of the data, to disaggregate information about student learning. So this is a sample data set from one of the spring 2023 pilots. For this particular learning outcome, we had enough information to separate out the data by international student status. We had information for 26 international students and 35 domestic students. We work to ensure that students are not singled out and that individual student privacy and instructor privacy are protected. So this chart shows the relative perspective of domestic and international students in each outcome category. For instance, 50% of all international students achieve proficiency, as did 51% of all domestic students. This shows that while similar percentages of students in both categories are proficient at clear communication, U.S. students are overrepresented in the adept category, with international students overrepresented in the developing category. Data such as this can be used by programs and departments as a starting point for determining what additional support is needed and what changes can be made in order to address these gaps. This addresses a comment that came up during the NETG process that assessment data should ideally be able to use to support program development and budget requests. So our goal is to move towards the campus-wide implementation of Canvas outcomes. In this model, faculty and instructors would be asked to select 1 to 2 relevant departmental learning outcomes for their course based on the curriculum maps and align them to the most relevant 1 to 2 assignments in a given course. So the particular departmental outcome would be attached to the rubric for that particular assignment where students are demonstrating their ability to address that outcome. Evaluating student achievement of these outcomes, for instance, might happen as part of the grading process for a final paper or a project in the course. So that number and that number only would come to academic assessment. The grade would still remain separate and would be provided directly to the student. To achieve this goal, my office is working with departments to review the departmental learning outcomes that were adopted between 2015 and 2017 and creating curriculum maps that document the courses where those outcomes are most relevant. From here, we'll work with faculty to create rubrics for the departmental learning outcomes and ultimately make them available to instructors in Canvas. This preliminary work, once established, would be revised periodically to make sure that the outcomes and rubrics continue to accurately reflect the department's goals and teaching. Here, the emphasis is on instructor-driven assessment of student learning, and we're working to keep the burden of labor on individuals to a minimum. So ultimately, again, my goal is that we create a sustainable process that allows us to document and understand learning across the institution. What we've been seeking to develop and test since 2021 is an instructor-driven process that does not place an undue labor burden on participants, while providing meaningful, generalizable data about student learning. Looking at the scope and labor of the 3 types of student learning assessment we've used at Emerson since 2015, I believe Canvas Outcomes enables us to meet that goal. In response to the concerns we've heard from faculty participants, Canvas Outcomes is instructor-driven. Individuals are able to evaluate their own students' achievement of the relevant outcomes, as demonstrated by the assignments in their courses that most clearly align with those outcomes. They are also able to recognize growth and development. Students will, we believe, come to better understand the goals and the value of their course requirements as they become more aware of the curriculum maps and assessment process. The streamlining of these processes will allow us to collect broad data in a sustainable way that respects individuals' labor and expertise and enhances the transparency of our processes and why we do what we do. As you can see, for the faculty members who have participated in both versions of the process, we've seen positive feedback regarding the time, labor, and potential impact of the data. One participant noted that the shift has meant the elimination of several tedious parts of the process of evaluating student data. The best part from a curriculum planning and evaluation perspective is the potential to be able to measure cohort progress in terms of student learning outcomes as they move from lower to upper level courses. Being able to look over final projects at the end of the semester with the learning objectives in mind helped me to think objectively about how the course and the students work toward those objectives during the final grading and reflection process. This new measurement tool is far more streamlined, scalable, and may even enhance the relationship between grading and student learning objectives. So our next steps are working with faculty and instructors to obtain their feedback regarding this project and submitting the Canvas Outcomes proposal to Faculty Assembly. We have presented to all but one department, Faculty Council, Library and Technology Committee, Academic Cabinet, and are sharing this now with additional stakeholder offices. Once we've been able to present, that proposal document will be shared for review and comment before being presented to Faculty Assembly and Academic Cabinet. As we move through discussion of the proposal, we'll be continuing to pilot Canvas Outcomes to further refine our process and address any questions that arise, so that ultimately we can engage all instructors in a sustainable way and begin to provide a much more rich and meaningful information about student learning to departments. Thank you very much. Again, I will send along the feedback form if you have questions or concerns that you'd like to raise with us.